This presentation, titled Auditing in the Virtual World, comes to us from Sheronda Jeffries. Sheronda is an industry leader at TIA Quest Forum, an industry organization dedicated to ICT supply chain quality. She represents TIA at global standards organizations, including ISO TC 176, ISO Casco Star, and the IAF, where she is the director representing users in industry. Her leadership as the co-convener for the update of IAF mandatory document for the use of information and communication technology, ICT, for auditing assessment purposes, which is ND4 2018, has allowed certification bodies, accreditation bodies, and industry organizations around the globe to mitigate the negative effects of the COVID-19 pandemic through continued oversight via technology, thereby protecting the integrity of supply chains for our food, aviation, and medical devices. And with that, take it away, Sheronda.
Thank you. So, as you guys can see on screen, this presentation is an update to a presentation that I've been talking about for quite some time. I've been talking about this since 2010, guys. Can you believe it? 2010. And here we are, May 2020. Well, with that said, here we are, May 2020. Things are changing. We're now living in a COVID-19 world, folks. With that said, technology is now the thing that's keeping us connected. It's helping us communicate with each other. With that said, folks, shameless plug, the only shameless plug you'll get with regard to this presentation. Now's the perfect time for solutions like Cisco WebEx. Now, there are a lot of other ICT or information and communication technology options out there. And we'll talk about some of those options, recognizing that each of those ICT options or information and communication technologies options, they're going to present specific risk and opportunities. On this slide, I show lots of options. You've got your good old-fashioned cell phone in the center of the slide on the bottom. And if you look around, you'll see things like Google Glass, HoloLens, you'll see drones, laptops, you'll see cameras mounted on harnesses, perhaps cell phones mounted on harnesses. Again, there's lots of different options out there. For each ICT option, we'll need to assess the risk and the opportunities presented. Each option will have risk or opportunities. So let's talk about some of these options, folks. We're going to talk about one of my personal favorites, telepresence. Now, I know, telepresence, it's got a significant outlay of expense associated with it. It does require some investment. There's also video conferencing that goes along with it. And video conferencing, that can range from everything from using a webcam all the way up to the very expensive telepresence concept. The advantage of telepresence, and it's one of my personal favorites, but again, it's expensive, is that telepresence allows everyone to sit at the same table. Now, most folks, they're familiar with data conferencing. Data conferencing, that's going to be like your Cisco WebEx, your GoToMeeting, those types of things. The disadvantage of data conferencing, just sharing your screen, sharing your desktop, the disadvantage of that is you're competing. It's kind of like someone's tapping you on the shoulder and they're whispering in your ear. And what it really is you've got these different screens that are popping up, the reminders that pop up, the bells, the whistles, the hey, go to this screen, click here, this screen's taking over, those types of things. And so you've got to be conscious of the fact because you are sharing your desktop, there's lots of things to distract, lots of things to take your attention elsewhere. Features of the data conferencing can include the file sharing, as we've talked about, links, discussion boards. There's also attention tracking, all kinds of little features that are being added on nowadays to those data conferencing tools. Again, for each of the options, you need to assess the risk and the opportunities presented. Now, you heard me say telepresence is one of my personal favorites. This is me actually utilizing a telepresence. I'm shown on the middle screen in the photo that you're looking at, and I'm actually doing an audit. The question that you've got to ask is, how would we audit if we were in the same location? You're going to use ICT to think about this, and that's going to require more planning, folks, and that planning will require more time. because you're going to have to think about how would we do this? How would we execute this if we were all in the same location? If we were all together, how would we do it? In the photo, we're in different countries on different continents, folks. Different countries, different continents. So let's talk about some of these ICT options. I've given you just a couple here. Now, the options that are shown on the screen, on the right-hand side of the screen, those are options that traditionally have a cost associated with them. Traditionally, your Cisco WebEx, your GoToMeeting, your Avaya Spaces, Google Glass, Microsoft HoloLens, Zoom, BlueJeans. BlueJeans is used in a lot of organizations that are in the ICT industry, the information and communications technologies industry, Adobe Connect, and Discord. Now, many of you probably aren't familiar with Discord, but if you have a gamer living with you, or as I like to say, co-working with me now, my college student is now away from home from college right now. They're familiar with Discord. That's a technology, a tool that they're using, a solution. What's interesting is the solutions, the options that are shown on the right-hand side of the screen, traditionally have a cost associated with them, but some of them are offered right now at free or reduced costs due to COVID-19. So I encourage you to check them out, visit their websites, and find out. If you check them out, visit where they've got COVID-19 resources listed, and you'll see that many of those options that traditionally have cost associated with them, they're offered at free or no cost. Now, some of them are going to have an outlay with regard to expense. Your Google Glass, that's going to have an investment with regard to infrastructure. Your Microsoft HoloLens, that's going to have an investment with regard to infrastructure. But again, they may be offering discounts as it relates to COVID-19. Let's look at some of the traditionally free low-cost options that we've got. Well, when it comes to the traditionally free low-cost options that are out there, you've got Skype, you've got Google Hangouts, Google Duo. These are some of the options that I've seen some folks use when it comes to conducting audits. You've got others that are out there, FaceTime, Slack, WhatsApp, Jitsi, Microsoft Teams. I've even seen some folks live stream Instagram and Facebook. So there's lots of tools that you could potentially use. For each of the tools, again, you'll need to assess the risk and the opportunities presented. Now, as you're doing the audit, you're going to need to figure out, am I going to take screenshots? How am I going to handle that? Now, if you're taking screenshots, I always tell folks, make sure you've got the volume up. Make sure you've got the volume up. I always have my volume up so that you can hear when I'm screenshotting, because you're taking evidence. And this is my IP if you're auditing my organization. So always ask before you take screenshots or snapshots. Snagit is a tool that sometimes is used with regard to taking screenshots or snapshots. So that tool is listed as well. So we've talked about different ICT options, different tools that you can potentially use when auditing in a virtual world. Let's talk about actually auditing in a virtual world right now. So when it comes to auditing in a virtual world, there are some challenges, folks. There are. A lot of folks think it's against the rules. A lot of folks say, I can't trust the technology. How do I know what I'm seeing is real? Logistics now become a problem because you're sitting in one space and the audit location may be across the globe. How do you handle that? You may be technology tools challenged. Hey, Sheronda, thanks for the list of options there. I don't know any of those. There may be some other challenges as well. Let's talk about these challenges. When it comes to the fact that it's against the rules, it's not against the rules, folks. The IAF, the International Accreditation Forum, IAF.NU, they've put together some FAQs to answer some of these questions with regard to, is it against the rules? Because quite frankly, the use of technology, the use of ICT in audits and assessment, it's not against the rules. The IAF, because of COVID-19, they've been extremely responsive. And I shouldn't say they, I'm a member with regard to representing the ICT industry at the IAF. And I actually participate on the team tasked with review and response to questions that come in. They've been very responsive. We've been very responsive with regard to creating updated FAQs. A couple of the questions that I've pulled, and actually, folks, this slide is used courtesy of Dr. Nigel Croft. This slide comes from a presentation that he just gave this morning called Auditing and Management System Certification in a COVID-19 World. So thank you, Nigel, for allowing me to use your slide. Question 10 from the FAQs for COVID-19 for IAF. For schemes under the IAF MLA, Multilateral Agreement, how are conformity assessment activities to be managed in this extraordinary period? And so the short answer was go see mandatory document number 4. Now you heard that document mentioned in my introduction. We'll come back to that document a little bit later on. There's also ID3, informative document number 3. Informative document number 3 talks about how to handle this COVID-19 world. It talks about how to handle disasters, forces of nature, those types of things. Additional FAQs. Could the time duration for closing out nonconformities be prolonged, taking into consideration this COVID-19 outbreak? The short answer, yes. Yes, the time duration for closure of nonconformities, it could take a little longer to close them out. Notice this question's in yellow, folks. Is it possible to perform a full certification audit remotely? The short answer is yes. Let me repeat that. Is it possible to perform a full certification audit remotely? The short answer is yes. Now, my response is yes, but there are some concerns, there are some considerations that'll need to be considered. You'll need to consider the scheme, the industry. You'll need to consider risk. Another question. Is IAF ID3 that was issued in 2011, way before COVID-19, is it still applicable? Even though it refers to a standard that has been updated, 17021 has been updated. It was updated in 2015, I believe. The short answer is yes, ID3 is still applicable. We now refer to the current version of ISO 17021. And ISO 17021, folks, that's a conformity assessment. We'll see it mentioned a little bit later in my presentation, but it pertains to certification body organizations. The last question that's shown here, the next one, and I'm sorry about the overlap. The question is, what about a postponement? Can we postpone our certificate? The short answer is the original deadline is going to remain the same, but we do have the ability to postpone or talk about conduct of the next audit. That gets us to the next question. What happens to transition periods as it relates to these standards? Will these transition periods for these standards, will they be extended? The short answer is yes. And if a conformity assessment body or certification assessment body, conformity assessment body, CB, I typically use the term CB instead of CAB, if they conduct a part of the initial certification with remote activity and they plan to complete the remainder of the audit on site, is it possible to issue the certificate at the conclusion of just the remote part? The short answer is no. You've got to do the full audit. You plan to do the rest of the audit on site. And the last question. Is IAF ID3 exclusively applicable for management systems? The short answer is no. You can use it for others as well. Now keep in mind that ID3, informative document number 3, that's intended to talk about how to handle, how to respond in this COVID-19 world. It doesn't specifically talk about audit in a virtual world. What's interesting is when it comes to auditing in a virtual world, everybody has had to respond very quickly. I show on screen here, these are the statements that have been issued by different organizations with response to where we are right now in COVID-19. Everyone is concerned about health and safety. The organizations that are shown, the 3 that are shown on the left, starting from the left, those are accreditation organizations, accreditation bodies, DACS and UCAS and ANAB. And all of the accreditation organizations, and these are the organizations that provide oversight to the certification bodies, to the CABs. These are the organizations that have said, we're going to go in and we're going to check the checkers. Well, they've said in checking the checkers and checking the certification bodies, we're going to use remote auditing techniques. We're going to use ICT in doing those assessments. The organization that's shown on the right, DQS, that's a certification body. And DQS has come out with this statement, folks, and I'm going to read it. For the health and safety of both your employees and our auditors, we've decided best not to conduct on-site audits until at least the end of May. This action is warranted for the mutual protection of our organization until the outbreak is under control. We will extend remote auditing even further, again, to protect the health and safety of everyone involved. So with that in mind, folks, let's think about this from a third-party point of view, from the certification body point of view. Is the risk of not doing an audit less than the risk of doing an audit using ICT, using technology? Well, let's see. If you don't do an audit, that does protect the health and safety of everyone. And yes, that allows the organization to focus upon operations without disruption. But there's no oversight whatsoever, especially at critical times. I mean, hey, we're at factory startup in some cases. In some cases, not only are we at factory startup, we're at factory switchover because some industries, some organizations, they've now said we're going to become more involved in the manufacture of PPE, personal protective equipment, for example. If we don't do audits right now, not only is there no oversight, but we may see some folks say, hey, you know what? I'm going to let my certification lapse. I'm going to let it lapse. And so with that, we may see some relaxed mandates with regard to certification in our supply chains in the future. The potential for fraud and liability due to simply saying, we'll extend the cert. We won't check you. We'll just give you another 6 months. We'll just give you another 9 months. Don't worry about it. There may be some fraud that occurs. There may be some liability concerns because no one is providing oversight. Let's go to the other side. If we do an audit using ICT, that does protect the health and safety of everyone because we're not going in, we're using technology. That does allow some level of oversight, and that promotes ongoing integrity. What's interesting is if we're using technology now, that could allow a real-time audit of business continuity actions, a real-time audit of risk management planning. I was doing an audit in Montreal, Canada, my organization. We had a power outage. That allowed me the opportunity to watch, to listen, to learn, to audit, to see what happens in real time with regard to business continuity. Possible negative impact of doing audits using technology, using ICT. The audit could be ineffective in achieving its intended result, or there could be fraud. How do you know what you're seeing is real? What's interesting is both of those can be managed with increased competence and familiarity in the technology, in the ICT. Increased trust. How do you get trust? How do you get knowledge? How do you get familiarity? You have to validate the ICT. You have to use the ICT. Try it out, test it out. Now's the best time. This information I received just last week. It's a company called ETQ. The founders of that company, they were pretty good friends of mine. We used to audit together way back when. I was a baby. My story, I'm sticking with it. But ETQ, they came out with some results from a study they did. How is COVID-19 affecting your location's production output? 55% of their respondents report that production is the same or has increased. Let me let that marinate for a second there, folks. 55% of their respondents said that production is about the same or has increased. Wow. Additionally, when asked how is COVID-19 affecting your local quality and safety teams' work processes, such as locations, 71% of the respondents said they're working remotely or in new locations. 71% of the respondents. This virtual world that we're auditing in, even in highly risky industries like the medical device single audit program, they've said we need to evaluate the possibility of performing a remote audit of the facility. And they've said we need to look at not only IFID 3, that document that talks about how to handle disasters and those types of things, but we also need to look for guidance in MD4, Mandatory Document 4, that talks about the use of ICT in audit and assessment. Not only do we see this in the medical device single audit program from the FDA, but we see this with regard to the rail industry as well. In order to support business continuity, they're making reference to IAF MD4. And another industry, food safety. Remote audit methods were introduced. And where a CB wishes to undertake a remote audit activity, as per IAF MD4, they're asking for a risk assessment. Again, these are highly risky industries. We're talking medical device, we're talking railway, we're talking food safety. It's not against the rules, folks. It's not against the rules. We're providing oversight in this COVID-19 world. ISO 19011 is the standard that talks about how to do an audit. And considering that we're talking about auditing in a virtual world, we got to talk about 19011. Well, 19011, it was updated in 2018, and it was updated to enhance the information that it provided with regard to auditing remotely, auditing in a virtual world. So if you look, I've got table A1 shown from ISO 19011, the 2018 version. What's interesting, folks, is the 2011 version of ISO 19011. It also talked about auditing remotely. So this wasn't just created for COVID-19. This virtual world, it's been around for a while. This is from ISO 19011, the 2011 version. Earlier, you heard me mention ISO 17021. ISO 17021 was updated in 2015, and this is a standard, a conformity assessment standard that talks about the requirements for those certification body organizations. There's a statement talking about conducting audits where any part of the audit is made by electronic means or where the site to be audited is virtual. And I know you guys are scratching your head right now going, Sheronda, hey, excuse me, what's a virtual site? We'll talk about what a virtual site is. The Auditing Practices Group, the APG, and if you're not familiar with the APG, I encourage you, these are information. They've published white papers and guidance documents that are available free to the public. They're available through ISO Technical Committee 176, Subcommittee 2. ISO TC 176, Subcommittee 2. Think of them as the authors for the ISO 9001 standard, the most widely recognized quality management system standard in the globe. They published Electronic Documented Information Systems, a white paper on auditing electronic documented information systems. And they've been extremely responsive. Now, you heard me talk about the IAF and our COVID-19 FAQs that are constantly being updated. Well, the Auditing Practices Group, they've published a new paper called Remote Audits. Hot off the presses, folks. This paper is less than 2 weeks old. Again, they're being responsive, recognizing that we're living in a COVID-19 world, a virtual world right now. So I've talked about these mandatory documents. You've heard me talk about MD4, highlighted on the screen. MD4, mandatory document number 4, updated in 2018. I was the co-convener for that update. It's the IAF mandatory document for the use of information and communication technology for auditing and assessment purposes. There's also an informative document. And the difference between a mandatory document and an informative document, a mandatory document is just that, it must be used. An informative document, it shows the consensus of the members and it's intended to support the consistent application. So you can think of an informative document as a best practices kind of document. So at the IAF, we actually issued IAF ID 12, informative document number 12. We issued this document in 2015, and it was principles on remote assessment. Now, assessment, that's what the accreditation body does to the certification body. So the AB, accreditation body, they assess the CB, the certification body, and the CB then audits the organization. So what we did was we said, well, before we start talking about audits, let's get some clarity regarding the principles of using technology for assessment, the AB to CB relationship. So we did that in 2015. And once we got agreement on the consensus there, then we said, well, you know what? Let's bring that information into the update of MD4 in 2018. And MD4, it'll talk about not only assessment, but we'll talk about auditing. So we'll talk about what the CB does to the organization, that's the audit, and we'll talk about what the AB does to the CB, that's the assessment. So MD4, mandatory document for the use of ICT for auditing and assessment purposes. IAF MD5 was updated as well. It was updated in 2019. Now, IAF MD5, you can kind of think about this document as I can name that tune document. IAF MD5, what it's really aimed at doing is removing some of that I can do that audit in. What do I mean by that? Well, certification body organizations, when they're thinking about how long it will take to do an audit, initially when it was the wild, wild west, we found that organizations were saying, well, I can do that audit in 4 days. And someone else would go, I can do that audit in 3 days. Now I'm showing my age here because I'm showing that I can name that tune in concept. But it really was, I can do that audit in 4 days. I can do that audit in 3 days. And so we said, let's put together some information with regard to what you'll consider when it comes to how long it takes to do an audit. And that was IFMD5. IFMD5, when it was updated in 2019, it introduced the term virtual site. Earlier, I said, you're going to say, Sheronda, what's a virtual site? Well, a virtual site is a virtual location where a client or organization performs work or provides a service using an online environment. Now, you guys are still scratching your head going, okay, Sheronda, but what's a virtual site? A virtual site is organizations, they don't have brick and mortar. Think about a bank nowadays. I know that's interesting, but some of you never go to the bank. You do online banking. Some of you don't even use mortgage companies that have brick and mortar. You're going to use online mortgage companies. Those are examples of virtual locations. They don't exist with brick and mortar. They exist in the internet. Those are examples of virtual locations. I talked about the principles of remote assessment and how this document was written as an informative document pulling together the best practices, and it was issued in 2015. And once that document was issued, then we began work to update IFMD4 in 2018. Let's look further at IFMD4. According to MD4, mandatory document number 4, the use of ICT in audit and assessment, the rules do allow it. All the requirements, including observation of activities, can be audited remotely. Hey, bring that camera in, use that drone. Again, there are risks and opportunities introduced, so be careful. But the rules do allow it. There may be some sector rules that may differ, so I caution you. For example, in the automotive world, they've got some limitations. In the food safety world, they're working to address concerns. Again, highly risky industry, food safety. Verify that the infrastructure that you'll need, that it's in place for the technology. If you're using low tech technology like FaceTime, you don't need a lot of infrastructure. But if you're using things like a drone or even like data sharing technology like Cisco WebEx, GoToMeeting, you'll need to make sure that you've considered limitations and make sure that you've got the infrastructure necessary to support the use of that technology. You'll need to consider security, confidentiality. How are you going to handle encryption, those types of things? There are risks and opportunities introduced with using technology. Make sure you've looked at the risk. Now, I've talked about the risk a little bit. We'll talk about the risk some more. We'll talk about some of the opportunities that are brought forward. Auditors are going to need to know how to use the technology. And some of you may be thinking, okay, well, you gave us a long list of stuff we could be using. How do we know which one's right for us? How do we know which one's right for the audit? How do we know which one's right for the client? One of the things that I do is I say, hey, ask the client which technology they're using. Now, this may require that our auditors learn a lot of different technologies, learn a lot of different tools, a lot of different solutions. So be it, auditors. This is the world you're working in now. Welcome to auditing in a virtual world. Get out there and play with the terminology. Get out there and play with the technology, the solutions, the tools. Get comfortable. Some certification body organizations, they're introducing their own solutions, their own platforms. And remember that additional planning may be necessary, and that could impact the total audit duration. Let's talk about some of these risks and opportunities that can impact the audit effectiveness, that can impact the ability of us to achieve our audit objectives. Well, when using ICT for auditing, we've got to consider a couple things. We've got to consider, who are we getting ready to audit here? What's their product? What's their service? How complex is it? How risky is it? I mean, if we're talking food safety, that's kind of high risk there. If we're talking medical device, what kind of medical device are we talking? Are we talking the low-tech mask? Or are we talking something that's implantable? We've got to look at the product, the service. We've got to look at the processes. Are we talking design, development? Are there labs? If we're talking design development, what's the protection we've got to look at with regard to IP, protecting their intellectual property? What's the security, confidentiality? Are they going to let cameras in? Same thing applies with regard to manufacturing. Do they have labs? Are there proprietary processes where they're saying, excuse me, no cameras allowed here? Are services provided on site? And if services provided on site, will we have access? Can we come in with our camera? Can we bring our drone? Now, what's interesting, folks, with regard to the information in gray about the auditee, we should be considering that for each and every audit. That's just not specific to a virtual audit. That's not specific to the use of technology in conducting the audits. That's not specific to a virtual world. What we are bringing on now, though, in this virtual world is we're bringing on the fact that we need to have knowledge of the technology. We need to be familiar with the technology. We need to understand the capabilities of the technology. Is it available? Does it work for us? Does it allow the audit objectives to be achieved? From an auditor point of view, we got to know the technology, folks. Again, same things apply. Knowledge, familiarity, availability, capability. Now we got to look at also, though, what's going to serve as our record. If we're going to keep screenshots, is that okay with the client? If we're going to go in with a video, maybe there are some people that don't want to be videoed. We now have GDPR concerns that we've got to be concerned about. Data protection is real. It's a real thing. How do we handle that? We've also got to consider what could go wrong, folks. Sometimes the technology just won't work. Sometimes technology fails us. So how do we handle that? How do we handle if we can't access? How do we handle if we can't see it? How do we handle if we can't hear? It's too noisy on the line. Maybe we have the video. We have the host walk through the facility and then step to the side. Maybe we have the use of things that allow things to be made larger, enhanced. Maybe we need to use some devices that we are looking through to enhance, make larger. We've got to look at the fact that there may be some malware. How do we trust that what we're seeing is real? How do we know this isn't staged? This is going to require more thought with regard to the audit. The auditor is going to need to make sure they're asking the right questions. Could you go to the left? I'm sorry, could you turn around and let me see what's behind? Could you go down and let me see the floor? The auditor has to look at, how do I establish that what I'm seeing is real? There may be some other considerations as well. I borrowed this, stole it shamelessly from A&AB. Love you, A&AB. Shout out to you. This is an accreditation rule that was issued way back when, folks. It was issued in 2018. And this was talking about how the CBs could be assessed by A&AB. If we modify this to talk about how the certification body could audit the organization, let's look at some of these. Well, of course, we'll need to have information readily accessible electronic document and information. The CB, they'll need to have virtual meeting capabilities. They'll need to have audio, video, aptitude, and resources. They'll need to look at, do I need to have the right IT? Who's the right people to serve as my backups? The CB will need to have competence with regard to how they're going to support the remote audit activity. How are they going to navigate through the online meeting? Are people competent to participate in the meeting? The CB is going to have to manage confidentiality and partiality. Hopefully, the organization that's being audited, they've got a history of demonstrated performance. I mean, if you think about those high-risk organizations, those high-risk industries, like food safety and those others, one of the things that food safety has said is they've said, we want to make sure that when we're thinking about this, we're thinking about organizations that are mature, that have demonstrated performance, demonstrated history. Of course, we're going to have to be able to support different time zones. I mean, duh. Come on, folks. That's the benefit of auditing in a virtual world. Many of us will be auditing in what I like to call soft pants. You know the translation. The CB will need to make sure they can support the language of the assessment. Those considerations don't go away. You may still need a translator. In this case, it may be easy to utilize a translator because the translator, they don't have to travel. They're now working from the comforts of their home potentially. Because right now, many of us are under shelter at home or stay at home orders. And lastly, as I said before, contingency plan for completing the assessment. I show on screen a link that you may find helpful for information from certification bodies where they've said these are our considerations in using technology for auditing. And some of those, they actually show examples of how they've used technology for auditing. Now, as I previously said, for each of the options, the solutions, the tools that we've talked about that you could use for ICT, there may be some risk. Security is a key risk. And I highlight Zoom because they've been in the news quite frequently. They've received a lot of scrutiny lately because they're being utilized by many different industries, many different organizations. Again, this is a risk. This risk may be prevalent for the other tools as well. You'll need to think not only what are the risks, but also what are the opportunities. So let's talk about a couple of opportunities that you can see with regard to the use of ICT. One opportunity you may see is, hey, there's no travel. So reduced cost may be one of the opportunities. Another opportunity is because the audit can potentially go a little quicker, you may be able to select more samples. And this is especially true when it comes to those transactional processes. You can select more samples because you can easily say, let's click this one, let's click here, let's click there. So it's easier. Now, again, that could also introduce some risk because now what folks may do is they may say, hey, let me see this. Oh, click, 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 click. And they're not doing a true audit. An audit is about looking for. I like to tell folks, you've got 2 eyes, 2 ears, 1 mouth. You use them in that proportion when auditing. So one potential risk may be another opportunity. Opportunity, selecting more samples. A risk, because you get to select more samples, you're not looking at the samples you've received and fully evaluating them. Risk and opportunities. So this is what I like to call my money slide, folks. Here's where we bring it home. Technology tips and techniques. I've talked about the fact that you're going to need more planning. Yeah, but a planning is a plan. You may need more planning. Consider the length of each audit interview. I'm typically good for about an hour, and then I'm going to need a break. So you're going to need to think about how are you going to break up what's normally an 8-hour day into bite-sized chunks, considering you're using technology. Schedule some breaks. Do as much pre-work as possible. Don't forget to ask everybody to bring their laptop or use their laptop with the webcam on. Don't forget to do that. One of the things that I always caution folks to do is to allow additional time for audit interviews. I allow what I call a buffer. There's nothing ruder than setting up an all-day WebEx meeting and having folks pop in when it's their turn, and you've gone long and they're hearing the end of the previous audit as they join the meeting. So allow some buffer time. Resist inviting more people because, hey, there's no travel involved, so I can have the whole team. You're still doing an audit interview. Focus on the interview. Don't invite more people just because you can. Use the host, the person on site. Now, if you've got someone on site and you're using a camera, use that person to address any issues. They're monitoring the camera, they're handling the camera. Now, and I have on the slide side conversations. And I know you guys are like, side conversation, but you're auditing remotely. A side conversation, that's now chats. A side conversation, that's now IM. A side conversation, that's now text. And whereas where you used to be in the room and you could see where the side conversations were starting to happen, now you're going to need to use the visual cues to see, is there a chat going on where I don't know about it? You're going to need to use those visual cues. So now your webcam and the ability to monitor body language and to watch eyes, now it becomes even more important. Be familiar with the technology you're using. If you need to share a desktop, if you need to take screenshots, know how to do it, folks. Know how to reduce bandwidth. One of the things that I always tell folks is nowadays I'm turning my camera off at the beginning, and then I'm turning it on when I need to. I'm asking my auditees, please keep your camera on. But you've got to figure out, how am I going to reduce bandwidth? Because I don't want the lags. I don't want the freeze. I don't want that. Be prepared to train others on the tool and know who to go to when you need help, because technology may sometimes fail you. So have a backup plan in place. Never forget that the word auditor means one who listens. 2 eyes, 2 ears, 1 mouth. Don't ignore the human factor when auditing. A brief word with regard to logistics. Logistics can be managed, folks. I've been using this slide almost since day one with regard to training and presenting webinars. This shows my team. This is my actual work team at Cisco. We're all over the globe. Scheduling a team meeting for us is a nightmare. There are tools to help you manage these logistics. Not only are you going to have to worry about where people are located, but you're going to have to worry about multiple holidays now. What are the holidays in Europe? What are the banking days? What are the holidays in Australia? You're going to have to be conscious of all of those now. And last but not least, how are you going to measure audit effectiveness? Be prepared to answer these questions. Are auditors able to effectively utilize technology? Do the results align to stakeholder expectations? Do the savings in travel, do they balance out? After COVID-19, how much travel are we really going to do? Ask, are the auditees and the auditors satisfied with the use of technology? I don't know what the new normal is going to be post-COVID-19, but I will tell you this. The genie is out of the bottle, and we should expect a new normal. I know Nigel Croft is so tired of hearing about the new normal, but quite frankly, the genie is out of the bottle. In the words of the president and CEO of a leading global certification body, this will change our business permanently. And early feedback is that our customers, they prefer remote assessment, remote audit. Lower cost, less invasive, improved logistics, and for the most part, stable technology platforms. Now, folks, I'm just going to give you a quick word with regard to IF Search. Well, in the past, I've presented here. In 2018, I presented at Exemplar Global's Online Auditor Expo. I presented on what is the IAF and why should I care about their database of accredited certification. And then in 2019, I provided a brief overview of what's happening at the IAF, along with an update on the status of the IAF database. And now here we are in 2020. Well, in 2020, Nigel Johnston will be presenting on IF Search, the global certification database users need to develop certified supply chains. I encourage you to check out his presentation on the Online Auditor Expo. When it comes to databases, some certification bodies, they're going to maintain public databases and they're going to provide an alternate method to quickly evaluate a company's certification status. Some accreditation bodies like Accredia, CNAS of China, JAB of Japan, and JASAN of Australia, Accredia, by the way, folks, they're from Italy, they're going to maintain publicly accessible databases, which make checking certificates easy and more efficient. Some industries like planes, trains, automobiles, and ICT, my industry, we're going to maintain databases, which also address the same things as the ABs and the CBs. And those databases that we're maintaining, planes, trains, automobiles, and ICT, they're going to have a little more information than those accreditation bodies, those certification body websites, because they're created for our specific industry. So there's never been a single source of truth for the globe until now. Welcome to IAF Search, a global single source of truth. That's now live, folks. The website's now live. Now, we've heard and recognized that there are some CB concerns, and those CB concerns, those certification body concerns, they're being addressed. They're being addressed. The data is protected in IAF Search, and the search is limited to known entities, company name or certification ID. You can't generate a list out of IAF Search. We're using data protections, CAPTCHA codes, encryptions, and you're limited to 3 searches per day unless you receive special approval if you're monitoring a large global supply chain, for example. Many CBs have cited data ownership. They've said, you know what, that client's certification data, we own that. And they will not include an organization's data without a request directly from the organization. So I'm asking you to submit that request. Copy me on your request. Copy me. I'll give you my email address. Let's talk about the importance of IAF Search during COVID-19. We are living in a virtual world. We are living in a COVID-19 world. This is a true story, folks. A county council trading standards officer desires to verify a certificate that's been provided by a supplier offering PPE goods for COVID-19. The county council trading standard officer, they attempted to verify the cert within IAF Search, but they were unable to locate the certificate. So they emailed IAF Search for help. IAF Search did some investigation, and they learned they thought the CB was accredited. They thought the accreditation body had uploaded their information, but the CB hadn't activated their account, and none of their certificates could be verified within IAF Search. So IAF Search reported back. They reported back that it appears the CB is accredited, but it's not clear to them whether or not the CB is accredited to ISO 1345, which is the medical device standard. And that's a concern for the county council trading standards officer, because again, this is a certificate for PPE. Now, this is very personal for me, folks, because the person that's shown on the screen, The person wearing the mask, that's the spouse of the IAF vice chair of the user advisory committee. This is a person that's near and dear to my heart. Had the CB activated their account and uploaded their information in IAF search, then the County Council Trading Standards Officer could have easily verified that the PPE supplier was ISO 1345 certified by an IAF accredited CB under the IAF MLA. Let me give you another example. There was additional follow-up. We believe the certificates you've been provided with are fraudulent. Now let's think about this, folks. How many people have said, you know what? I can make PPE. How do you spell that certification body's name? Most of the CBs, they've got 3-letter names. How do you spell that? The name on the certificate does not hold accredited ISO 13485 certification. Sadly, we've seen an increase in these types of certificates during COVID-19. We've logged this matter into our feedback database, and we're working with the accredited certification body. We've seen an increase in this, folks. One CB, they've placed this warning on their website: fake personal protective equipment certificates. Another CB, DQS, they've said, here are some instances where we've seen fraudulent certificates. We've seen fraudulent certificates for COVID-19 related equipment, PPE. So why are we making it more difficult for users, government, and industry to verify the validity of IAF accredited certification, especially during COVID-19? Why are we making it more difficult? Remember, IAF search is live. If you'd like to learn more, I encourage you to look at the global QMS database presentation called IAF search at the Quality Digest website. And again, check out the presentation, IAF search, the global certification database users need to develop certified supply chain. You'll find that Exemplar Global. I encourage you to learn more. Contact me. My email address is shown. Thank you.
And thank you, Sheronda Jeffries, for that look at auditing in the virtual world. And that concludes this presentation.